Rarely have I seen there not be room to move on an initial offer, but it really does come down to the compensation research because most companies are going to have a base salary range and a total compensation range, and they try to hire most employees on like the low to mid end of that band. So really, once we do the compensation research to actually find out what that range is, then we can start to shift our goals of, hey, our goal is to get you to the top end of the pay band.
Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in.
This is a really lo-fi podcast, and but much beloved. Let's put it this way. You know, this week I got a few messages, and people are just so lovely. You know, in how they explain how they listen to the episodes. Like one of them said, "I've just listened to 3 episodes in a row, and I'm sitting at this bench in a park, and I needed to write to you." And I'm
That's
like, "Oh my
great.
God, what have I done to you, woman?"
Yeah.
But it's called the Job Hunting Podcast. So, of course, people are looking for work. They are interested in what we're saying here, in learning about bettering themselves, especially at that recruitment stage. And when you reached out to be a guest, I'm like, yep, this makes sense. Let's talk to you.
Awesome.
When did salary negotiation become a thing for you?
Yeah, very interesting question because it actually came a thing for me about 12 years ago, actually right out of undergrad at a university. So I was going into a negotiations role for American Airlines where my core role was going to be to negotiate. And I was actually in a negotiations class, my final one in college. And we talked about negotiations, and I was like, I'm going to try negotiating this job offer I just got. Probably won't work. I have no leverage, but I'll do it. And if it does work, I'll turn it in as my final project. So I ended up going through the negotiation, had no idea what I was doing. And it ended up being successful where I got a sign-on bonus, a base salary increase, and even like 60,000 airline miles. So that was successful. That actually my teacher put me in touch with someone else that got a job with American Airlines. So I helped him negotiate. Then when we started, I noticed no one else negotiated their offers. So over a course of like 5 or 6 years, people kept coming to me to help them negotiate until in 2018, I finally said, hey, too many people, I'm going to spin up the business. And now since 2018, I've been doing it kind of for everyone outside of just friends and colleagues.
It's a very interesting part of the recruitment and selection process because as a job candidate, you're so eager to just be in and have that name sign in the dotted line. You kind of forget that there is that opportunity, or even if you remember, you might be too scared to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the biggest thing I see, right? Is it happens all the time is people just they don't want to do anything to jeopardize the relationship or the opportunity, and they've probably been in like a long interview process, so they just want to sign and get it done, and they don't think it's worth it. But in all reality, I mean, it's really an extra step to the interview process, and if you do it, it usually takes on average maybe 3 to 5 days, but then you see usually a drastic increase with your comp going forward.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people sat at that negotiation course that you had at uni and did not utilize it to the extent that you have. What do you think has made you like a natural at this? Can you see some traits in you or some qualities that you think make you sort of more attuned to negotiating?
I would say yeah, no, actually, because at the end of the day, I think anyone can negotiate. But what I've noticed is even when it comes to me, it's harder to negotiate things for yourself, right? My background's on business to business negotiations. So when I'm negotiating on behalf of a company, it's a lot easier because it's a task, it's a job, it's something I need to do compared to, say, when it comes to my own personal finances. That's where I guess there's more kind of fear on the line, and you get a little nervous, might feel you don't have as much leverage. But some traits that have kind of helped me do that and get better at it is making sure I'm prepared beforehand rather than just going into it willy-nilly. And then actually going through it. And the worst case, as long as you approach it in like a kind and professional manner, instead of aggressive, as a lot of people think negotiations are, the worst case is you typically get a no. But if you don't ask, it's a guaranteed no. So I've usually taken that mentality to kind of make me better in approaching and having those conversations rather than walking away from them.
Okay. Do you think that it's harder for us to do personal negotiations because it's more emotional? And then if you have somebody else, they take the emotion out of it? Or is it because we can feel the risk more than the opportunity, which is we have that feeling inside and that negative wiring that we know we all have, where we tend to be more negative than positive about things like this?
Yeah, I think it's the latter.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk to clients as a salary negotiation coach, I hear a lot of fear, worry, and all that because it all goes back to like what state of mind you're in, right? Throughout the interview process, you're
Mm-hmm.
focused on doing everything you can to go ahead and get the job, get the role. Maybe it's your dream company, or maybe you don't have any other opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to actually shift that script to have to then ask for more instead of just advocating kind of for the job and why you're the best one seems pretty uncomfortable. And people think you might come off as ungracious. So it's very similar to like when you talk about money and you're asking for more, you get the fear, at least in my mind, and what I hear a lot from clients is that you're asking for too much, you're coming off as greedy. And I think that's kind of what ends up going on in everyone's mind, which is why they avoid this or why they have that like myth, that fear, or that worry. Instead, usually when you have these conversations,
Mm-hmm.
the person on the other side probably did the same thing and
Yeah.
they had these conversations or are thinking the same. So you find out that they end up going better. It's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of overcoming that in your head to have the conversation.
Yeah. All right. That's so interesting. I've interviewed in my podcast Lou Adler a year or so ago. Are you familiar with Lou? Do you know who he is?
No, no, I'm not, but I'll take note of
Okay,
them.
no, you should search him on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. He has like 1 million followers. I would call him a recruiter's coach, right? So he coaches businesses and HR professionals and recruiters to do better recruitment, which is fascinating. And I have interviewed him, and I've interviewed also an Australian equivalent called Greg Savage. But Lou, on the podcast and in sort of his ethos and his philosophy, he has written books about it. He believes on a 30% improvement in your condition at your next job. So if you're between jobs and you're looking for another job, you should focus on a 30% raise. It's not a raise in salary, it's a raise in everything, like a holistic approach, right? I follow that to a T with my clients. I really do. Even for clients that are not necessarily seeking career advancement, not everybody wants to go up and up. That's fine. Some people want to go sideways, some people want to change professions completely. I'm a career coach, so of course I have a range of clients, but the trouble of going through, and sometimes the trauma, sometimes when they reach me they're already so traumatized from job searching. It really needs to be a better place for them, right? We work really hard to make it 30% better. Do you have like a percentage or a goal for your clients like that? How is it that you decide what to aim for? I know, I think, we can all understand that there are individual circumstances and industries and sectors and locations that may affect the salary for a professional. But do you work with clients as well in that sort of betterment of their professional life?
Yeah, so it's hard when it comes to goals, right? Because when it comes to salary negotiation, nothing's guaranteed, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the company's decision on if they want to
Mm,
kind of move or not.
mm,
But usually, goal-wise, is my goal going into it is to make sure that the client actually gets something out of it. One, they learn more than just how to ask for more, but also the negotiation strategies to not only have this conversation, but also other conversations, whether it's with a partner or a business dealing or internal customers. So they
yeah.
actually know more of the ins and outs of negotiation. And then when it comes to the specific numbers on a salary negotiation, typically rarely have I seen there not be room to move on an initial offer.
Hmm.
But it really does come down to the compensation research because most
Yeah.
companies are going to have a base salary range and a total compensation range, and they try to hire most employees on like the low to mid end of that band. So really, once we do the compensation research to actually find out what that range is, then we can start to shift our goals of, hey, our goal is to get you to the top end of the pay band.
Hmm.
So I'd say like overall arching is not necessarily a percentage, but it's to identify the top end of the pay band, both on a base salary basis and top end or total compensation basis, and see how we can get clients to that before they begin.
Yeah. And what I think is fascinating, Brandon, is that your expertise benefits a range of people, most of them quite good at what they do, right? Like people need to understand that even though they're excellent professionals, sometimes even very senior executives, that doesn't mean that they know what you know. That information that you just shared about the salary band was one that I shared a couple of weeks ago with a client who is really experienced and went for a job. And when she was given the band, she asked for the top. And that was at the beginning of the recruitment process. So, of course, she didn't go forward. So, that's the sort of just little detail, isn't it? That
Yeah.
if you know, you know, and if you don't know, it can screw you up, even at the beginning of a selection process, right at the time when you convert from job application to a first call with a recruiter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that a lot with executives. And then the other skill set is typically product managers because negotiation is usually like a key part of their role, right? So everyone feels they're good at negotiation, but typically it's a different approach of what you might do, say, business to business, compared to when you're in the interview process and you're trying to make sure the company wants to work with you. And what I've noticed is usually when I start to like work with clients and break down the strategy of how this is different than like a car salesman negotiation and that there's more to it, as well as there's a bunch of items that might be on the table that they don't know about since they only do this maybe once every 5 to 8 years. I see
Hmm.
kind of like a eye-opening moment in shock. And
Yeah.
sometimes when I work with people and they've negotiated in the past, we find out through the process that shoot, I didn't ask for that item, I missed that, and all that.
Yeah. We are recording this in 2024, and even though I like to make the episodes, timeless, I have noticed this year, not so much that the negotiations are harder, I don't think they are, but the salaries are not as exciting as they were a year and a half, 2 years ago. Have you found that it is the case as well where you are?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Sometimes I have. What I've noticed is more job market wise
Hmm.
is actually people getting roles is it's become a lot more competitive. So for them to actually get in the door and get the job, they're having to apply and interview with a lot of companies. So they're not getting
Yes.
as many offers. But as for compensation and negotiation success wise, it's been pretty consistent
Mm.
because typically what we've seen and we work with like a lot of niche skill sets, usually in tech as well as executives, is what we've seen is once the company goes through the process to hire them, they have all the approvals, they've made their selection, they usually have the ability to flex compared to losing a client over something small.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I probably have a smaller sample than yours. I don't know, but I noticed that when the supply demand was different about 2 years ago, there were, people were really on the hunt for professionals. The
Yeah.
salaries and the packages just seem more enticing. And now, there's a retraction in the market. There are not that many jobs. And I look at the salaries and they're like, well, this doesn't, if you were hired 2 years ago, you would probably be earning a little bit more.
Yeah.
I don't know, it would be interesting for me to actually do some data analytics with this. What are the common myths that you see people coming to you? You probably have this as well when people come to you and they already come with lots of assumptions about salary negotiation. You touched on one that was like the aggressiveness that it needs to be done, that sort of that transactional approach that is so wrong because at the end of the day, you have to work with these people, so you can't burn bridges yet, right? Are
Yeah.
there other myths that you see coming to you that you need to unwind?
Yeah, I do, and I would imagine you've heard quite a few as well. But I would say the top one that I get most, or I hear the most frequently, is going to be that if I negotiate, I'm going to get the offer rescinded, or they're not going to negotiate at all. And we've done hundreds and hundreds of salary negotiations now, and we still have never seen a job offer rescinded. The
Hmm.
only time I've ever seen a job offer rescinded working with a client was when they were insistent on a title change. And to be honest, companies just don't really change titles after they make a selection, unless for it's like a smaller company or a niche role. But outside of that, have never seen a job offer rescinded. And the reason being, I mean, usually you actually end up having more leverage when you get into the negotiation phase, right? You get the offer, the entire hiring team has checked everything off and said, "Hey, we want you for the job." Now it's on to the recruiter to make sure you accept. So from that point on, it's very hard as long as you aren't asking for crazy amounts that the company would never pay for, coming off as aggressive to where essentially maybe they don't want to work with you anymore, and you might be bad for their client-facing or internal customer-facing roles. There shouldn't be a risk. The worst case scenario is you get a no, but we found that like 9 times out of 10, if you do it correctly, the company will work with you to give you a better package before you receive.
Yeah, 100% agree. Never seen it happen. Hundreds and hundreds of people I've worked with. What I tell clients right at the beginning when they're working with me that they don't realize is that the referees are most likely to burn you than your salary negotiations. So be really careful with your reference checks. Make sure that you have all the things. So we've had offers rescinded because they couldn't find their certifications, like at that due diligence phase, where you need to show, some organizations have that, some don't, but you need to show that you really graduated from this program or that program or whatever. They just didn't have the certificates and they like couldn't prove it. What else? Especially if they did things overseas, and I've seen that happen. The other is when you want to negotiate, and that's okay. And I actually sometimes tell clients, let's work out these things at the tail end. Like if you want to be completely remote and the job is not completely remote, and they say no, and then the candidate say, well, in that case, I don't want it. So they try to negotiate other types of benefits at the tail end, and then they decide that no, that's not what I want. I can't come to your office, which is like 3 hours away from where I live or something. So they wait until the tail end to discuss those things, and that's what I've seen. But never salary, never, the sort of package or benefits. So I'm with you there. If you have you worked with clients that not only wanted to negotiate their future salaries with the future employer, but then were in a position to also negotiate with their current employers and then got all tangled up in that situation?
Yeah, I've had a few. It actually happens more often than not.
Yeah.
Is a lot of people, I mean, if they're comfortable, ideally they don't want to leave their current role. And usually what ends up happening is they take a recruiter call or they start looking because they might be unhappy or feel that they're not paid well within their current company. So I've worked with many clients where we not only try negotiating the new job offer, but they end up taking items back to their company just to see if they would match or if they would work with them before they leave. And more times than not, if they're a top performer and they're doing well, typically the company does try to work with them. And then depending on what they do, we either shift the focus to working on that company or we keep going forward with the new company. But what we noticed is it's kind of a fine line is a lot of times is when do they actually bring this up, because you don't want to bring it up to your employer that you're leaving too early before you have the job offer, right? And then vice versa, you don't want to bring it up too late to where you are going to lose the offer if you don't accept and they won't move. But I've seen many times it come up to where they mention it to the company and within a day they come back with a better offer. They ask for the offer, they match it. And our goal shifts to kind of renegotiating their package. So if they do stay, they're happy going forward and passing on the opportunity.
How long can you leave the new company waiting? What is the etiquette here? Because seems like it can backfire, right?
Yeah, that's a great question because actually a lot of people don't ask that enough, and I've seen many people that will sit on a job offer for a week, 2 weeks,
Mhm.
because the recruiter says, "Hey, like we just need to know in the next week or two," and they come back then to start working through it. But if I think about it from actually like a negotiation standpoint, if you put everything in the benefit of the company, their goal is to fill the seat and get you to come to their company. And
Mm.
usually, if people are very interested in a role, they either accept right away or they start asking questions and working through right away. When someone comes back like a week later, 2 weeks later to try to negotiate or have questions, usually the company already has a red flag and is worried
Mm.
if that person's going to move forward anyways. So when it
Yeah.
comes to time, my recommendation is at least kicking everything out and having clear communication within the first 24 to 36 hours, showing that you're doing your due diligence, you're reviewing the offer, you're asking questions, and then if you are going to negotiate, start negotiating it because you have a higher
Mm.
probability for them to work with you right off the bat when they think you're actively interested, rather than coming back at like the final stretch.
Yeah. Okay. Um, when I'm working with very senior clients, sometimes we need to get a lawyer in. Have you had that situation where there's too many clauses with shares and, non-compete clauses and yada yada, and it becomes too complex for you, or do you now have the expertise to handle those as well?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm not a legal advisor, so I usually stay out
Yeah,
of
neither
those.
am I.
But I do have recommendations and we refer our
Yeah.
clients to. But what
Okay.
we've noticed is some of those items that can be tabled and reviewed are usually not necessarily financial items. It's more so just getting clarification of how it's going to play out. So
Hmm.
typically, the way we navigate it is if we are having to have someone reviewing it, we table those items and we place the focus on other items throughout the offer process. And essentially saying, once I get clarification on this, I'm looking into these. We can talk about those, but here are some other items we can work on in the meantime to make sure that these check out and fit my
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah. My
But
only concern is I don't want my clients to be locked in. Sometimes I find that people are miserable at their jobs, but they're waiting for some, you know, it's not even quarterly, but it's like an yearly goal where they can only access the shares at a certain time. And it just takes forever. And it's mean. It's really bad. It's really bad. So we just try to avoid the lock-in, so that because I have the tail end situation when clients are really trying to get out of a bad employer, and they feel like they're trapped. And if they leave now, then they're going to miss out on quite a lot of benefits. So it's an interesting situation. What's I want to ask you a very, U.S. related question because it was something I don't claim to be good at everything. It would be hard for me to do. And I'm in Australia, and Australia is like amazing. Australia is more like Canada. If you don't know Australians' employment laws, you might sort of know Canadian employment laws. So we do have quite a lot of, great benefits. And one of the things that struck me when I first started working with American clients is that you really can't take a break, can you? Because of insurance, the medical insurance. So, is this the sort of stuff that you negotiate in your total compensation with clients as well? I'll give you an example. I had a client that was working with an employer and she had medical insurance through that employer, and then she was going to get medical insurance through the other employer, and she was so burnt out. She was post pandemic. She wanted to take a break, but she couldn't, which is something that lots of Australians do. They take like, okay, I'm going to be without a job for 2 months, or I'm going to accept the offer, but I'm going to accept it. So I start like a month from now so I can take a break. But then she would be without her entire family would be without insurance for a month or 2 months, so she couldn't do that. And I'm like, wow, I never realized it that was an issue. Here in Australia, we don't have that problem. So, do you work with negotiations like that to help people take breaks, or, I just find it fascinating. We don't have that here.
yeah, I do because that's
Okay.
a big thing, unfortunately, for in the U.S. is we all have private health insurance, typically
Yeah.
through our employer. So if you quit with your employer, right, and there's a gap between your work, rarely do you have it. So it's an item that needs to be considered. So typically what I do in the negotiation process before discussing numbers and doing anything is what I call the due diligence phase and asking strategic questions is bringing up and raising those items to the recruiter, right? So reviewing the offer package, reviewing the benefit package, and coming up with a list of questions. And one of those is typically targeted on how their benefits work. And if you do know that once you quit, if you say your benefits either end like the first day you leave or at the end of the month, it's an item you can raise to the company to present your concern and essentially let them know like, hey, I am planning to make the move, super excited, but obviously I want to take some time off before I go from company to company and take a quick refresh before I start. But my biggest concern is that I'm going to be uncovered with health insurance before this time. So is there a way to get it covered earlier, or do you have any stipends, or what is the best way to work around this? Usually what we find is when we ask those types of questions, sometimes with the larger companies, their unfortunate benefits are kind of focused and set for all employees. So they don't have flexibility. But if you're an executive or if you're working at a smaller company, typically they can have the ability to kick things off earlier when they do
Yeah.
your backgrounds check, if you sign the offer, or even if you put a start date just so you can start the benefits, but you really actually don't start work until 2 weeks after that, just so they can start doing the onboarding on their side.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that that's completely reasonable to ask. I think people need to take those breaks between jobs. I usually recommend 3 weeks. One to unwind, one to enjoy, and one to prepare. So 3 weeks is what I usually go for, if not a whole month. And I also think people don't realize that a new job is just as stressful as an old job that you don't like. It's not that you're not going to like your new job, it's just the learning curve is so stressful. So taking that break is great. So it's good that
Big
you
time.
sort of touch on that. What about in terms of timing? A lot of people complain that right at the beginning of the process, when they are applying for jobs, they already need to know what their compensation is when they're doing the online application. And people complain to me a lot about that. I'm kind of a tough coach on these things. I think people really do need to know, and they should stop complaining. Do you think differently?
Yeah. So the way I think about it, because I have a different take maybe than some
Okay.
people, but I think it's silly for someone right off the bat to tell them how much they want to make. But I do
Okay.
think it's also silly for the company not to share how much they're paying up front. Because
Right.
if you think about it, right, it doesn't matter what country you're in. If you go into the store, say to buy a TV, right, if you ask the salesperson how much it is to buy that TV, that car, whatnot, they're going to tell you how much. So
Yeah.
why, when you're evaluating jobs and you're looking at interviewing or taking a job, when you ask how much it pay, they turn around and say, hey, well, how much do you want to pay or how much do you want to make?
Exactly. Very
Right?
dodgy.
It's silly because they have the budget, they know what's approved. So what I advise is it's okay to talk about money up front, either before the interview process or during it, but typically that information should come from the recruiting team. So
Yeah.
if you get asked for salary expectations, it's best to turn it back on the recruiter or the hiring team by saying, hey, look, I've been
Yeah.
focusing on interviewing for the role, not necessarily what the pay should be. But I'd love to understand from you on a base salary basis and total compensation basis what the pay range is looking like for this position. And if you do
That
that,
is
hopefully they'll
perfect,
share
by
it.
the way. Everybody, stop listening, rewind, write it down. That's perfect, Brandon. It's a very good way of putting it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's it. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
power of just turning the question back and asking them
Mm.
because they should know the pay they can. And then from you, you can evaluate if that's in the right range.
Yeah.
They're not always going to tell you the true top end of the range, but at least it's going to give you an idea as you go throughout the interview process. And then actually, once you get the job offer, that's typically where we see the leverage shift to the interviewee, to where now you can evaluate everything together. You have the offer, you have the benefit package in front of you, and then you can do your research and hopefully negotiate it up to the top end of the pay band, depending on where it
Yeah.
nets out.
If anyone is listening and is interested to know how recruiters think about salary, listen to Kyle Thomas' episode. He's a recruiter based in North Carolina, I think, Washington, can't remember. But he's definitely one to listen to, and he will explain how they think about salaries and how they work it out with candidates. But my concern is when there's no one to talk to, Brendan, and that's usually, it's happening more and more, even for more senior roles, where you look at a job ad and there's no one to talk to. You just need to apply code, and then they ask a salary range. In the United States, some states are, you're required to put salaries in the job ad. Some you are not. In Australia, in addition to LinkedIn Jobs, we use another platform for job search called Seek.com. And thank goodness, because Seek has filters for salary. So you can look for a job. You mentioned project management or product management before, and you could type that. You could type then filter for location and filter for salary, so you can sort of find a range there. So I usually recommend people, if you're in Australia or anywhere where there's a Seek platform, there's about, I don't know, 6 or 7 countries around the world, that you seek out the salary range in the filter. People don't even know that it's there. It's like in the advanced filter, and you just need to find out. But even then, go to Glassdoor, ask around. The fact that people don't like, and here, I think in the US is a bit more open. Here we're very British. In Australia, we don't like to talk about money. We never share information about salaries with anyone. And that is detrimental to our own career. Right? If you don't ask people that that work in that organization that you're applying for, how much does this role make? Can you seek out that information for me? Because I need to fill out a form. Like, you need to find out. Don't be embarrassed to ask people about salaries, because it's not helping your career. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right.
You
I
say
mean,
I'm right.
you are right. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that's why in the US we're seeing a ton of pay transparency laws coming out, to
Yes.
where what happened is they started to research it and find out that people are paid completely opposite of what others are doing the same thing at the same exact company, and we're starting to get different pay rates to where it doesn't make sense for companies not to provide this. So it makes sense doing your research. And the other thing, if you don't know what to put in an application, what are those automated forms? Because I also like to recommend not putting in everything and usually putting industry standards or the market average and all that, just to make sure your actually form goes through and gets submitted to the hiring
Yes.
team,
Yes.
because then they're going to come back and they're going to ask you, and then you can turn it back on them to find out.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't feel forced to put that in, but if you can use different tools, at least get a general guidance of what to put in, and then hopefully have that conversation with the recruiter to get the full picture in the interview you're set.
Exactly. It's not life or death. Just put what you think will work and then go through the ATS system. The bots are looking, and you go through that, and then you negotiate like Brandon just said. What about success stories? Give us a good story so that people can relate to and think, all right, I need to pay more attention to this.
Yeah, I mean, so I have countless success stories of negotiations, but I would say the biggest one that I've had recently, that is probably closest to home, is I was working with someone who was actually moving to Microsoft, into a product management role. She was super excited. It was her dream job, but she was only a year out of college. She went through her undergrad, her graduate, and even got her PhD, and she only had a year of experience. So Microsoft was looking at bringing her in as just like a graduate role, right? They have this interim program where all the offers are the same, you're the same level, and she was planning to take it regardless because she wanted to work there. That was her dream. But luckily, she reached out to me and I worked with her, and we did the research based on her experience, based on the company, and we felt that it didn't make sense that she's getting the standard job offer that a new grad with her experience was getting. And we found that the pay range for the other level role that she should be considered for was much higher. So we went through the process. Set the negotiation, had the calls with the recruiter, and throughout this entire process, we saw that she actually got leveled up. We found out the hiring manager actually came back in and said, "Yeah, this is ridiculous. Like, we're not doing this," and even pushed on the recruiting team and the comp team to work. So she got a title adjustment and about a 12.8% increase in pay, which I think over the 4 year package ended up being about $84,000. So someone out of college went through a negotiation, only a year of experience out of college, and saw a huge success. And that's all on top of her just planning to accept the role anyways. So the rewarding experience after working with her and seeing how it changed and things that wouldn't have happened if she didn't just take the time to ask was huge.
That's a wonderful story. It makes total sense to me. And one of the things that really, I don't know how else to explain this to people, but I talk about it a lot, is that investing in people like you or me, is the return on investment is huge. And I think the difficult thing for you and I is to educate professionals to invest in themselves so that they can see results like the one you just mentioned, because it's so worthwhile, right? And sometimes I say this because I have quite a few people that reach out to me about being a year unemployed, 10 months unemployed, and then they freak out and they're like, okay, I want to work with you, but now I don't have any money. And if they had reached out earlier to work with a coach or do, consultations with you or something like that, they might have had a job way sooner, and figured things out much sooner.
I agree. I mean, another way to think about it, and I tell people a lot, is think about like professional athletes, right? They're at a certain point
Exactly.
in their career, they have an agent, someone that they're constantly chatting with. They also have physical therapists. They have everything to make sure that they're getting better and they're continuing to push themselves and they're getting a good deal. So as people go up in their career, it gets more complex. They might be great at what they do on a daily basis, but navigating that sometimes is not always straight up and right in front of them, and the complexities of it get harder. So to actually have an advocate in your corner that's not only holding you to different goals, but helping you think differently and seeing what else is on the table is key.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like your expertise, Brandon. I think you're onto something here. Um, I also think that people normally don't have the patience or the persuasiveness to work things out for themselves. They probably it's so much easier to critique and support a friend than it is to critique and support yourself in a positive way. So well done for setting up your business as you have done. And we will have a link in the show notes so that people can find you and find you on LinkedIn and on your website. But is there anything else that you would like to say? Because we need to start winding down and letting people go on with the rest of their days.
Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, these strategies, they can be learned, and I'm
Yeah.
happy to teach you, or you can go to some of the free services at our website. So the best way to reach out and use some of our free tools is to check out thesalarynegotiator.com. I have professional negotiation coaching if you want to work with me directly, also salary negotiation courses, and then even a free total compensation calculator. That way, you can actually get the full picture on your compensation and your benefits as you start to not only evaluate what you're currently making, but future job offers as well. But
Brandon, I have another question for you now that you're saying this. Would you be a good coach for somebody who negotiation is part of their job description and they need to be better at it? Do you do
yeah,
that sort of work? Yeah.
I do. So, I mean, it goes back to talking about the interview process, right? As
Right.
how people should treat the negotiation as part of the interview. I used to recruit heavily for different procurement and vendor management roles where their key role was to the negotiate. And like product managers, huge role, executives, huge part of their business. So
Yeah.
if you get a job offer that your key role is going to be either negotiating with internal partners or external partners, and you don't negotiate, you're not necessarily giving the best kind of view of yourself to the company, but it's a
Right.
chance that you can actually double down and improve your interview, kind of highlight on yourself if you go through it correctly. And as long as you navigate that in a professional and kind manner, they're going to hopefully double down. One, move your pay, and then two, you're going to confirm to them that they hired the right employee.
Yeah. All right, my friend. So nice to talk to you. Keep in touch. If you ever want to come back with new ideas on the podcast, you're more than welcome to come back.
You as well. Absolutely. It's
Okay.
always a good chat, and I'm glad I was able to share some advice.
Good. Thank you.